After the boat capsized, my boyfriend's sister, Linda, and I fell into the water together. Without thinking, my boyfriend grabbed Linda first and pulled her out of the water. On the way to the hospital, he kept talking about how Linda was pregnant and how he couldn't leave her behind. What he didn't know was that I was also pregnant, but I didn't want to keep the baby. The bright lights in the hospital room made it hard for me to open my eyes. Everything was quiet, but my head felt heavy and dizzy. I used the wall to help me walk out of the room. I heard familiar laughter from the next room, and when I looked through the glass window, I saw Leo and Linda talking and laughing together. I thought that when I woke up, Leo would comfort me, feel bad for leaving me, and apologize. But that was just a thought. The reality was that he left me alone in a cold hospital bed while he was next door, joking around with Linda. Watching him care so much for her made me feel like a joke. I was so confused, and I just wanted to go back to my bed, but my weak body couldn't hold up, and I collapsed on the floor with a loud thud. The noise made Leo and Linda stop talking. Leo turned and saw me. His face turned tense and uncomfortable. He helped me up and said, "You're awake. Why didn't you tell me?" How could I tell him? How could I explain how scared, cold, and uncomfortable I felt? But where was he when I needed him? I didn't say anything and pulled my arm away. Leo seemed panicked now. I could see it the first sign of worry from him. He was afraid that I had woken up alone. Leo didn't want to leave me alone, so he came to talk to me. Linda looked like she was about to cry. Why was she upset? I was the one left alone. I ignored her and slowly made my way back to the cold hospital room. Leo brought me warm water, but I didn't want it. Linda noticed my silence and weakly smiled, telling Leo to spend more time with me while she went for a walk. Leo hesitated, looking at her, but then said, "You go." "I'm fine." He was worried about Linda. Of course she was pregnant and had fallen into the water. She needed someone with her. But still, Leo looked at me with guilt in his eyes. "Are you hungry? I'll get you something to eat," he said. Was he feeling guilty? Of course he was. I had almost died. But still, he hurried out to help Linda. He would be back soon, I thought. He must have reassured her before leaving. When he returned, he brought me soup. I smiled faintly when I saw it. He must have forgotten I'm allergic to seafood. A small bite of shrimp could make me throw up and have severe stomach pain. If I ate too much, it could even send me into shock. When I first moved back home, to avoid upsetting my parents, I ate everything they gave me except seafood. They thought I was just being picky and would scold me for it. But one day, I ate seafood in front of them. Less than half an hour later, I was in the emergency room. After that, they never made me eat seafood again. But the judgment didn't go away. When I started working and left that city, I no longer had to put up with it. Then came Linda. She was the opposite of me. She loved mushrooms and could eat seafood without any problems. After eating seafood soup, she would feel calm. I couldn't be angry with her because of her baby, so there were always a few seafood dishes on the table. Leo must have realized too late that I couldn't eat seafood. "I rushed back to see you too quickly," he said, looking embarrassed. "I'll go get something else." Watching Leo, I couldn't help but notice how awkward he looked. He reminded me of a child who had done something wrong and was now waiting for an adult's forgiveness. "Leo, I'm not hungry," I said, trying to hold back the sadness inside me. Since Linda appeared, he had been all about her. He no longer saw me the same way. I had never been the one he chose without hesitation, not before, and certainly not now. Leo quietly took the soup away and turned to leave. I sat there, picking up the cold water and sipping it slowly. I hadn't eaten anything since I woke up, and now my stomach felt like it was being stabbed with a knife. After finishing the cup, I rushed to the bathroom to throw up. I wanted to, but nothing came out. Linda came over from the next room, her eyes full of concern. She gently helped me back to bed and called for a nurse to give me some glucose. Leo still hadn't come back, maybe because he was avoiding me. He always stayed calm, even when he was in the wrong. He never truly apologized. He would just leave me to calm down and come find him when I was ready. That's how he always was. But this time, things were different. I wasn't angry, and I didn't even cry. I had grown used to this. Disappointment after disappointment had led to a kind of despair, and, with how little time I had left to live, there wasn't much hope for anything to change. Linda was Leo's childhood sweetheart. She came from a rich family and was always the star in everything she did. She was beautiful, gentle, and perfect in so many ways. I knew about her even before I was with Leo. She was the one he had once crushed on, and I found out about it from his hidden photo album. In the photos, she went from a cute child to a graceful adult, always smiling. I asked Leo about it once, and he claimed he treated Linda like a sister. But could a brother really write love letters to his sister? The accident happened one gloomy autumn day. Linda, who was pregnant and emotionally fragile, had felt unwell. So we decided to take her to the lake for a walk. We were in a small wooden boat with 4 people. While we were out there, she started feeling discomfort, so the boatman hurried to take us back to shore. But in the rush, the boat capsized. Leo could swim, and he immediately swam to Linda. I was freezing in the water, but my heart was even colder. We were saved by lifeguards, and Leo held Linda in his arms to warm her up, comforting her, praying that her baby was safe. He was trembling with panic, desperately trying to protect her. And there I was, shivering all alone in the cold. I wished I hadn't seen that scene. In that moment, I almost wished I had drowned right in front of him, hoping he would live with guilt and regret for the rest of his life. I wanted him to think of me every time he saw that lake, remembering me as I was, drowning. Unfortunately, the ambulance arrived quickly, and we were rushed to the hospital. On the way, Leo held me tightly, apologizing to me, saying, "Vivian, it's okay. I'm here." But I was too weak to calm his worried heart. From my view, Linda lay in a coma. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her body looked so fragile, like paper. I gently reminded Leo that she was in a coma, and he rushed to the doctor to ask about her condition. The moment he heard Linda's name, he was all over it, like a dog eager for meat. I had seen this side of him before, the overwhelming sense of responsibility he had for Linda. His care for her was obvious. I used to believe his excuses, but now I couldn't fool myself anymore. I touched my stomach and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy has to let you go. I don't want you to be born into a world without love." Inside me, a tiny life was growing, but I had stomach cancer. I didn't have much time left. I had always loved Leo. We had tried for this baby for 2 years. Without much hesitation, I had decided to fight for my life to let our love live on in this child. But Linda's arrival felt like a punch to the head, and all the love I had tried so hard to hold on to, shattered with just one of her smiles. No one cared about this child but me. Some children are cherished, the center of the world, while others just disappear. Some children are treated like precious gifts, while others are destined to feel unloved. Because of poor nutrition in my childhood, my body was always weak, and I never thought having a child would be possible for us. When I started vomiting occasionally, I thought it might just be some sign. But the diagnosis of stomach cancer and the pregnancy test results came to me at the same time. I didn't know what to feel. With mixed emotions, I called Leo, but there was only a busy tone on the other end. Who was he talking to at that moment? Leo was on a business trip, and the first call he made when he got back was to Linda. I turned off my phone and stayed at the hospital for a long time, sorting through the reports. After a while, I decided to take the bus home. As the bus neared my stop, it made a stop at a nearby supermarket. I looked out the window and saw Linda, with Leo carrying bags behind her. They were laughing and talking, looking so happy, like a newlywed couple on a shopping trip together. They turned into a maternity store, and the bus moved on. My stomach churned, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. I tightly bit my lip to keep it in. I clutched my bag, trembling, but I missed my stop and ended up staying on the bus. The cold wind seeping through the window made me shiver. When had Leo changed? Was it when he brought Linda back from abroad? No, it wasn't that simple. Maybe it was when he ignored my video calls during his business trip? Or perhaps it was all the times he had been indifferent to me while showing so much care for Linda? Everything I had been afraid to face was now painfully clear. Was Linda really just a sister to him, or something more? As the bus reached the final stop, the driver asked me to get off. I wandered aimlessly, lost in my thoughts. Then a pretty young girl stopped me, blinking her innocent eyes, and handed me a small gift box. "Would you like to try our new pudding? It's known to bring happiness." I looked up and realized I had passed by a dessert shop. I took one of the puddings and ate it. It was delicious, but despite its sweetness, tears began to fall. The girl thought she had done something wrong, so I quickly put the box away and ran off. I cried outside for a while before finally heading home. When I opened the door, I bumped into Leo, who was sorting through the shoe cabinet. He had just returned. "Why are you back so late?" I asked. "Work stuff," he replied, but I could tell he wasn't paying much attention. He threw his coat over me, saying, "Winter's coming, so put on more layers when you go out." I held onto a tiny glimmer of hope. "Let's get married. Let's wait a little longer." But Leo didn't hesitate. "After this busy time, we'll get married in Finland. I'll give you a romantic wedding." His eyes sparkled as he said it, and for a moment I believed him. But why not now? He sighed, took my hand, and said, "Vivian, you know how much work the company has right now." I could feel it, the truth that I wasn't as important to him as Linda, or even his work. I was always at the bottom of his priorities. I wanted to ask him, what if I were pregnant? What if we had our own child? Could we get married now? But I didn't have the courage to ask. I was always so afraid, perhaps because I had already given so much of myself in the past, just to be with him. The dream of a wedding in Finland seemed sweet, so I smiled and accepted it. But then, a few days later, my stomach started to cramp horribly. Quietly, I went back to the hospital, where the doctor told me my condition had worsened rapidly. He suggested I be admitted for treatment, late-stage stomach cancer treatment that would only buy me a few more days. But no matter how much time I had left, there was an undeniable fear of death, a fear I couldn't escape. I sat quietly in the hospital corridor, feeling like life and death were fighting inside me. I never called Leo. Maybe he was busy. I only saw him after work, almost every night. I was used to being alone. I thought about the 2 times in my life when I fought back. The first was against the people who had hurt me and my fake father. The second was against the disease that tried to take me down. At that time, I truly believed I could beat it and have a child. I had hope, a kind of wild hope. Even then, I imagined the joy on Leo's face when he became a father. But it was only after I fell into the water that I realized how silly I had been. My child, when born, was going to feel unwanted. Pregnancy can bring mood swings, and I was no different. Leo tried to make it better by cooking for me. It felt strange, he'd never done anything like that before. But I wasn't hungry. He patiently fed me a rolled egg, his face showing both worry and a little pleading. I forced myself to eat a bite. I thought to myself, what if I had died that day in the water? I didn't know how to swim. Leo's face changed when I said that, and he told me not to say such things. He looked me in the eye and said, "I won't let you die." I told him, "You won't save me either." I was being stubborn, but he stayed quiet. I thought he wouldn't say anything more, but then he spoke up. "If you die, I'll die with you." He added, "You can't leave Linda. You can't leave your family. You still have your parents, your brothers, and Linda's child." But I didn't believe him. Leo was just saying things to make me feel better. That night, I had a long dream, a strange mix of reality and memories. It felt like I was watching a movie. I saw Leo as a young boy, trapped in a dog cage. All the other kids were crying or scared, but Leo just stayed quiet in the corner. My father had said he was mute. No one wanted to buy him. In the end, he was left behind, alone. My father said Leo's face was handsome, but they could cut off his limbs and use them for performances. I told Leo this, trying to scare him, but instead he looked at me and asked if I wanted to run away with him. He said that without me, he had no way out. He told me he had been taken just like me. He said, "Where are the parents who treat their child like property? My real parents are waiting for me outside the city." He said all parents should love their children and give them treats, candy, warm clothes, and hot food. He painted a dreamlike world for me, one where if we escaped, we could be reborn. I agreed, remembering how my father used to take out his anger on me, beating me when he was drunk and locking me in the cage. He said I was lucky because no matter how hard he hit me, I wouldn't die. One night, I overheard him talking about using me to have children when I was older. That scared me more than anything. A few days later, my father sent me to watch the children in the cage while the village burned. Leo and I escaped in the dark, changed our clothes, and walked through the mountains for 2 days until we found the road. We were saved. It had been a while since I last visited the hospital. My pain was getting worse because the cancer had spread. Leo was always away on business, and when he was home, he didn't notice how bad things were getting for me. On Linda's birthday, Leo rushed back to be with us. I had never celebrated a birthday before, not even after I escaped the mountains. Back then, no one cared about birthdays. Growing up, no one celebrated my birthday. To people like me, kids who were kidnapped, birthdays didn't matter. We were just products to be sold, and who knew when a stolen child was born anyway? Even if I had been returned to my real parents, there would have been no birthday celebrations. They didn't feel like my parents. Their stiff, teacher-like ways didn't fit with me. So, I stopped bothering with birthdays altogether. Celebrating alone just didn't make sense. I started to believe Leo was wrong about some things. Not all parents love their children, and the world outside isn't always filled with sweet treats and happiness. There's a word for people like me, substitutes. My real parents had a daughter of their own, and they split their love between her and me. It never felt like enough. Leo remembered my birthday, though. In the 3 years we were together, he made sure to celebrate it with me every year. By then, I didn't care so much about the lack of love from my real parents, because I had Leo. But now, Leo, the person who used to celebrate with me, was with Linda. I saw Leo at Linda's house one day. When I arrived, he was tying a red scarf around Linda in the heavy snow. They hugged, like lovers reunited after a long time apart, quietly showing how much they missed each other. Our house was just a few meters away from Linda's, and she was clearly his priority now. When Leo saw me, he quickly let go of Linda and rushed to me, wrapping me in his arms. But something felt off. His hug smelled of Linda, and it made me freeze for a moment. "Vivian, I've missed you so much," he said, holding me so tightly it almost hurt. After celebrating Linda's birthday, he took me home and, like a magician, pulled out a bouquet of my favorite flowers, bluebells. I didn't even know how he managed to get them in winter. It wasn't a special day. There was no reason to buy flowers, but I carefully placed them in a vase. It was sad, though. Once the flowers were picked, they would start to die. It always reminded me of my own illness, the slow fading that was inevitable. We lay in bed together, and Leo held me from behind, his face buried in my neck. His voice was soft. "Vivian, you've lost so much weight." I tried to ignore the pain, not wanting to talk about what had happened in the water. But the more I tried to avoid it, the more it stuck in my mind. Leo was sweet-talking me, but I couldn't ignore how much he seemed to care about everyone else except me. "Leo, do you really love me?" I wondered silently. The scent of the bluebells helped me fall asleep, but they weren't a cure. In the middle of the night, I woke up with excruciating stomach pain. I fumbled in the dark for the medicine, but all I could feel was emptiness beside me. "Leo, where are you?" I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. It was late. Where could he be? He answered, and I could hear that his voice was shaky, clearly worried. "Vivian, I'm at the hospital. Linda's in pain." Then I heard Linda's faint voice in the background, and Leo spoke quickly before hanging up. He didn't even give me a chance to tell him how much pain I was in, too. This was the second time I had been abandoned by him. The pain was too much, and I felt too weak to fight it. It was snowing outside, and I collapsed on the floor, consumed by darkness and pain. Maybe it would be better if I just let go. When I woke up, it was late at night. The room was still dark, and panic gripped me. I didn't know how I had resisted before, but I wasn't sure how many more times I could keep fighting. I sat in the corner, staring out the window as the sky slowly started to lighten. Suddenly, the door flew open and cold wind rushed in. Leo was back, looking exhausted and covered in snow. He collapsed onto the floor. I spoke softly. My stomach hurt last night. He froze, and his hand clenched at his side. I could see the pain in his face, but he didn't say anything. I know I have a serious stomach condition. When it hurts, it feels like all my energy is drained away. Stomach pain brings back so many memories for me. Memories of flames shooting into the sky. Memories of being hurt. Leo couldn't possibly understand how I ended up with this condition, and he would never know just how much pain it causes me. Just when I needed Leo the most, he was with another woman. While I was in agony, barely able to keep myself together, he was at the hospital praying for Linda. He lowered his head, his voice full of guilt and pleading. "I'm sorry, Vivian. I looked at him, curling my lips into a small, tired smile. "It's okay," I said. "Just a stomachache won't take my life." But as I said that, I couldn't help but wonder, did he think of me when he was praying for Linda? I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the urge to ask, but I knew the answer would only hurt more. So I stayed silent. He walked up to me, his hand cold as he helped me back onto the bed. "Vivian, let's get married," he said, kneeling on one knee, holding my hand with a look of sincerity. I was shocked. Married? This wasn't what I expected. A few months ago, I might have been moved to tears, but now all I felt was frustration. "Leo, you slapped me a few times, and now you think saying sweet words will fix everything?" A thought crossed my mind. I wanted him to feel the pain and despair I was living with. "All right," I said. His eyes lit up with tears as he hugged me tightly, repeating my name over and over like he had just found relief. Then he asked, "Do you like children?" His body tensed as he rested his head on my shoulder, hiding his expression. "Having you, Vivian, is enough for me," he said softly. Leo knew how difficult it was for me to have children. He rarely spoke in such a sentimental way, but in that moment he did, trying to comfort me. Yet the fleeting happiness from his words quickly faded, like dry leaves crumbling at a touch. After taking care of Linda's situation, he boarded a plane again, promising we would marry when he returned. He never let me see him off before, but this time he did. At the airport, right before going through security, he turned back to wave at me. His smile was full of energy, like a young boy full of hope. "Wait for me," he said. I knew what he meant. I thought it would be the last time I'd see him smile like that. When he was gone, I received a message from him asking me to take care of myself and visit Linda more often. I replied with a simple okay. At home, I decided to go ahead and register our marriage. I also prepared a special gift for him. Before all of that, I went to visit Leo's grandmother. The old lady always loved children, and I couldn't deny her the small hope she had left. She had been moved to a nursing home because of her dementia, and caregivers took care of her now. After explaining the situation to them, I went to see her. She took my hand gently and said the words that pierced me to my core. "Linda, make sure I see you two get married." Then suddenly, she shoved me away, screaming, "You're not Linda. Where is Linda? Where is Leo?" The caregivers rushed to calm her, but I stood there frozen, my chest tight, struggling to breathe. The old lady didn't know that Linda was pregnant. Leo must have brought her there before. What did that mean? What was Leo really up to? What was I to him? What did he want from me? I remembered when I first met Linda, how protective she was of her stomach. I had shared my own desire to have children with Leo, but he reassured me, saying it was okay if we didn't have kids. I thought he was just comforting me, telling me not to worry about not being able to conceive. But now, I wondered, why did he get to decide whether I could have children or not? My mind was a tangled mess of thoughts, and now I was beginning to see a thread. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and I didn't want to keep hoping for things to change. I didn't want to ask Leo any more questions. I had no more expectations. After I left the nursing home, I decided to visit my parents' house again. Life there hadn't been great, but at least they'd spent some money on me. I gave them most of the money I had saved from my job. With that, I felt like everything was settled. My parents asked a lot of questions, but I didn't have the energy to explain anything. I just walked away from my old home. The moment I stepped out the door, I felt a wave of relief. All I could think about was one place, Finland, the land of 1,000 lakes. It's known for being one of the happiest countries in the world. Who could blame me for wanting to chase happiness at this point in my life? Before my flight, Leo called me. "Vivian, I'm sorry, but it'll take me 2 more days to come back. Will you wait for me?" he asked. "Tomorrow is supposed to be our wedding day." I told him not to worry. I was going home. He knew how my parents felt about me, and I could hear the worry in his voice. I reassured him, saying I'd go back and talk about the wedding when I returned, but for now, I needed to go. After a short pause, he added, "Take Linda to see the old lady more often. She likes kids." I hung up, turned off my phone, and took a deep breath. Before going to my parents' house, I stopped at the hospital for an abortion. I couldn't bring a child into this world with no one to care for it. I couldn't bear the thought of my child being alone in such a cold, indifferent world. After thinking it through, I realized that our time together hadn't been as perfect as I once hoped. It was my own stubbornness that led me to this relationship. Leo could let go of Linda and be with me because of some strange fate, some past life debt. I used to wonder if I hadn't started that fire. Maybe I could have stayed in that perfect world forever, not knowing the outside world, not yearning for the warmth of a family. Maybe that would have been a better life for me. But now that I've left, it seems like they are the ones who were truly meant for each other. In the short years I've lived, I've seen a lot of the world. As the plane took off, getting further away from the ground, I watched the city shrink and silently said goodbye, goodbye forever. Leo's side of the story, The first time I saw Vivian was when we were both trapped in that cage with other children. I was inside, and she was outside. At first glance, I knew she was another child who had been taken. I showed her the outside world and we escaped together, saving a lot of kids along the way. As our paths crossed more, I couldn't deny I was falling for her. But there was a problem. I was an undercover police officer, as was Linda and her husband. We had all grown up together, and one of us had to go undercover abroad. It was supposed to be me, but Linda's husband secretly volunteered to go instead. He went alone, and Linda and I stayed behind to help with things here. My cover was that I was the CEO of a company, which allowed me to travel a lot for work. Vivian didn't know any of this. When she pursued me, I couldn't return her feelings at first. I had to keep my true identity a secret, and being involved with me could put her in serious danger. I'd seen what happened to families when an undercover cop's identity was exposed. It was terrifying, but her love for me was strong, and mine for her was no different. We ended up being together. However, after a few years, things got dangerous. Eric, who stayed close to the drug lord, was in real danger. Then, I received some intel about a power struggle within the drug group that involved Linda's husband. Leo's story continued with difficult decisions. He couldn't bring himself to tell Linda that her husband had died, but other undercover officers had gathered valuable information from the drug group's internal strife. Since Linda had been working with him, she also received the news. Before leaving, Linda's husband had asked Leo to take care of her and her unborn child. Now, with the danger looming over them, Leo was worried about both of them. He brought Linda to stay with him to keep her safe. She was struggling emotionally, so Leo did his best to comfort her. When the boat accident happened, his only thought was to save Linda and her unborn baby. He couldn't face Vivian at that moment, because he knew he had broken their vows. He tried to explain that Linda was still carrying a child, but when he saw the sorrow and disappointment in Vivian's eyes, he didn't know what to say. He just hoped that Vivian would understand. At the hospital, Linda woke up first, shaken from a nightmare. She was on the edge of breaking down, so Leo went to the next room to keep an eye on her and make sure she didn't do anything rash. He tried to calm her by telling funny stories about her husband, and it seemed to help. Linda began to smile again, remembering the good times they'd shared. As Leo watched her, he couldn't help but reflect on his past with Linda. He had once loved her as fiercely as Vivian had loved him. At one point, he regretted his feelings for Linda, but over time, he let it go. Those memories were now locked away, replaced by his love for Vivian. He didn't want Vivian to misunderstand, so he explained that he now saw Linda as a sister. He felt a little irritated that Vivian brought it up, but she eventually understood and didn't bring it up again. Then, something outside the door caught Leo's attention. He rushed out and found Vivian on the floor. She had obviously seen everything, and Leo was nervous and unsure of what to do. But to his surprise, Vivian didn't look sad or angry. She simply pushed his hand away and returned to her room. Linda followed her, saying she wanted to go for a walk. Leo didn't want her to go alone, so he made up an excuse to go with her. Later, Leo brought Linda a bowl of soup, but he didn't realize it had seafood in it. When he saw Vivian's expression, so numb and distant, he felt a wave of fear. He quickly got rid of the soup and left, telling himself that Vivian's anger would eventually fade. He hoped she would give him a chance to explain. But instead of a second chance, Leo was assigned to go abroad again for work. While he was away, good news came through. The operation he had been working on was ready to begin. The information they had gathered from Linda's husband's death had been enough to speed things up and ensure its success. Once Leo landed, he immediately called Linda to share the good news, and she was thrilled. However, when he returned home, he didn't find Vivian. Instead, he went shopping with Linda and bought her many things. It wasn't until later that evening that Vivian returned, looking heartbroken. Out of nowhere, Vivian asked Leo to marry her. Leo told her to wait just a little longer. There were still urgent matters to handle, and he wanted to make sure everything was settled before they got married. He promised her a big wedding once the operation was finished, and he had earned enough merit to retire. By then, Linda would probably have given birth, and she would be recovering from her sorrow. As things started to calm down, Leo had to keep leaving Vivian's side. On Linda's birthday, he rushed back and gave her a red scarf that her husband had secretly chosen for her before going abroad. Linda cried when she saw it, and Leo held her tightly, comforting her. Then he noticed Vivian standing in the doorway. The joy of being reunited with her after so long made him embrace her tightly. He could see how much thinner she had become. Her fragile body almost like a delicate kite that could break with the slightest touch. He knew she was carrying the weight of everything that had happened, but it wasn't the right time to confess everything. Though Vivian had stopped contacting him as often, it was clear that her silence now was a far cry from the way she used to constantly revolve around him. Leo was still struggling with his feelings and actions. One night, he received a call from Linda while Vivian slept peacefully beside him. He rushed over, relieved to find that Linda and the children were okay. But Linda needed to stay in the hospital for observation. When he answered Vivian's call, he only had time to exchange a few words before he was called away. By the time he returned home, he found Vivian in distress on the ground. Panic overwhelmed him, and in that moment he proposed to her, even though he hadn't planned it, or had a ring ready. But Vivian didn't react the way he had hoped. There was no surprise or happiness in her eyes, just a quiet acceptance. Leo didn't mind. He thought that as long as he could lock her into marriage, he'd eventually confess everything to her, and she would forgive him. He told himself that everything would be okay because it was almost over. He hoped that once he returned from his mission, they could finally go to Finland and get married. Before he left, he hung several talismans on Vivian, praying they would protect her if something went wrong. Vivian had once laughed at him for keeping so many talismans, teasing him for being afraid of death. Leo's real fear wasn't death itself, but leaving Vivian alone in this world without him. But his mission had a slight delay, and he had to stay 2 extra days. He called Vivian to apologize, and she told him she was at her parents' house. She asked him to visit Linda's grandmother more often, and then the call ended abruptly. When Leo finally completed his tasks and returned to the country, he found that Vivian was gone. At home, the room was filled with various medications and puddings, with a delicate gift box sitting on a cabinet. Inside was a pregnancy report, and Leo was overjoyed. He was going to be a dad. He had dreamed of this moment, but his happiness quickly turned to confusion and pain when he realized that Vivian had ended the pregnancy. He couldn't understand why she had done this. Was it because of how he had treated her? He tried calling her repeatedly, but her phone was off. Where had she gone? Leo checked her itinerary through a friend and found out that Vivian had gone to a nursing home and then flown to Finland. He learned from a nurse that the elderly woman, who knew about Leo's feelings for Linda, had been confused before she fell ill. Leo couldn't blame the old woman, but the situation was breaking his heart. He booked a flight to Finland, hoping to explain everything to Vivian. But just as he was about to leave, Linda called to say that her operation had been a success. But instead of a joyful reunion, Leo received a devastating call from the embassy in Finland. The voice on the other end told him that Vivian's body had been found in Ivalo, Finland. Leo couldn't believe it. He had just seen Vivian alive and well, and he couldn't understand how she could be gone. Linda accompanied him to Finland to identify the body. When they arrived at the morgue, Leo saw the lifeless figure of Vivian. Her face was pale and still, her body thin and frail. He tried to wake her, desperate to take her home, to marry her, and give her the wedding she deserved. but the hospital staff stopped him, telling him to let the deceased rest. Leo and Linda buried Vivian in Finland. In the days that followed, Leo wandered the city, visiting places they had been together, hoping to find any trace of Vivian. He went to the shrine where they had prayed for protection when they first met. He knelt there, praying to the gods to guide Vivian's spirit home. But all he could do was mourn, lost in his grief. Leo couldn't shake his feelings for Vivian, even after her death. Before leaving, he found her stomach cancer diagnosis report in the house they had once shared. The floor was scattered with puddings, many of them new desserts from a shop she had loved. He visited that dessert shop, where a cheerful girl recommended a dessert known for bringing happiness. But as he stood there, the weight of everything hit him, and he sank to the floor, unable to hold back his tears. It was too late. He realized how much he had hurt Vivian, and how desperate and in pain she must have been during those final days. He was filled with regret. "I'm such a jerk," he thought. He finally admitted to himself that he had lost the woman he loved because of his own actions. Returning to the cemetery where Vivian was buried, Leo saw the woods blooming with her favorite bluebells, and he could almost imagine her laughing at his pain from where she lay. He bought a small house near the cemetery and became a graveyard keeper. He didn't want to keep her waiting too long. He had to atone for the mistakes he had made. Meanwhile, Linda, who had grown up with Leo, had always known his feelings for her were not the same as the love he had for Vivian. Her heart had always belonged to Eric. However, when Eric passed away, and Leo comforted her through her grief, Linda began to understand how much Leo had cared for her. After Eric's death, Leo was the one who helped her through the overwhelming sorrow, especially with their unborn child. When Vivian died, Linda saw Leo's grief and understood his pain. They buried Vivian in Finland together, but after that, Leo disappeared. His family couldn't find him, and he wasn't there when his grandmother passed away. 4 years later, Linda received a call from the embassy about Leo. She took their child and went to Finland, only to find Leo lying cold on the table instead of Vivian. He looked even thinner than she had last seen him. The autopsy report said he had died from lung cancer. Visiting his home, Linda saw the signs of his misery: cigarette butts, empty bottles, and the toll of years spent drowning in smoke and alcohol, consumed by thoughts of Vivian. After Leo's cremation, Linda laid him to rest beside Vivian. As the urn was lowered into the ground, the heavens seemed to weep, and heavy rain poured down. Perhaps it was Vivian's way of mourning Leo's passing.